Hey, this is Christian Dyke, and you are listening to one of the coolest podcasts that you can get online these days, and it's with Bob Bender on the business side of music.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
This is Bob Bender, and you're listening to this edition of the business side of music. This week in the studio, we have someone I've actually been trying to get a hold of and corral him, or rope him into being on the show. I've known this gentleman for probably about 3 or 4 years. Found out he has quite a bit of musical history in his background, and it's something that I think will intrigue you that are listening. On the show today, we have Chris Christiansen. Welcome.
Thanks, Bob. Nice to be here.
So when I first heard your story a few years ago, you told me about what your mom and dad had created, which I think a lot of people didn't really understand. You see it on television now, and it's this big process. It's a huge gala event. But they founded, or should I say they co-founded with some other people, the Academy of Country Music.
Yeah, co-founded it with Eddie Dean, who wrote King of the Road, and Roger Miller recorded and made a big hit out of that. Eddie was a good friend of my dad's. They golfed together, and they also joined another gentleman by the name of Tommy Wiggins. He was a disc jockey at the time. And
was he a disc jockey in the L.A. area?
In the L.A. area,
okay.
Yeah. And he was also a country western singer. He had a couple of recordings. And so he used to hang out at Mom and Dad's nightclub. And the four of them got together and were just talking about how little respect, in their opinion, country music and country musicians got. In those days, it was called shit-kicking music. That's because there was a lot of shit-kicking going on in all the bars.
Yeah.
But they thought that the musicians actually deserved a lot more respect than they were getting, and better paychecks also. Country musicians didn't get big paychecks as a rule at that time, back in the early 60s and late 50s. And so they decided to honor some of those musicians and singers themselves and have a little awards show. The first one they held at my parents' nightclub was called the Red Barrel nightclub down in...
Was that in Hawaiian Gardens?
Hawaiian Gardens,
yeah.
Thanks. I was searching my brain for that.
I remember you telling me that in one of our conversations.
Not a lot of people know where that's at. It's just inland from Seal Beach and Los Alamitos. They originally had a club called the C&W Corral, which stood for Chris and Mickey, my mom and dad's names. Then they sold that place because they got an offer to take over the Red Barrel, which was owned by another gentleman. And he wanted to get out of the business and was looking for a quick way out, and it was a big step for them because it was a big dance club and huge bar, but had a big parking lot, a lot of potential. And so they jumped on the opportunity, and they ran and owned that club for several years.
And from what I understand, the focus of the Academy of Country Music back then, I guess it was actually called the Country and Western Music Academy.
Right, it was originally called the Academy of Country and Western Music.
And its focus was on the West Coast country sound, right?
Yeah, they knew that there were a lot of country musicians, good country musicians, that actually resided and originated from the West Coast. Not all the country music entertainers and singers were from Nashville.
Right.
And they also knew there was a lot of really good country music coming out of Bakersfield. The Bakersfield sound was just beginning to be founded, and Mom and Dad had met Buck and Bonnie Owens, Merle Haggard, and they were all from out in that area. And then Dwight Yoakam came along, and they knew that there was a lot of really good country music coming out of that part of the country. So California had its share of good country music.
What made them decide to put together this award show? Was it just something that had been kind of bubbling for a while? Or, I mean, because it has actually turned into one of the largest country award shows in the world.
I think originally it was probably Tommy Wiggins, who's a singer, songwriter, disc jockey, as was Eddie, and Tommy was also a promoter of sorts. What he really needed was somebody to go along with the concept him and Eddie and my dad talked about, But they also needed a venue, a place to actually hold the award show. And Mom and Dad had this big club that could seat 400 or 500 people. And so they thought that was a natural place to do it. Mom agreed to host us. And I think she covered all the pool tables with a big chunk of plywood, and everybody brought potluck dinners.
It was potluck, yeah.
Yeah, I had a potluck dinner the first 2 years, and it was quite a lot of fun. And they invited some singers that they had met along the road, and it went from there, and it just became unstoppable at that point.
I think what a lot of people don't realize is the Academy of Country Music, the ACMs, as we know it now, was actually the first country award show, long before the CMAs.
Yes, it was. It was 2 years before the CMAs were ever founded.
And of course, the focus was, as we talked about initially, was on West Coast artists, but you did see more of the mainstream, I guess, for lack of a better vernacular, the mainstream artists. But it was mostly, it was the bona fide country acts that were on this show. In fact, if I remember right, the trophy was what we called the hat trophy.
Yeah, it was a big hat.
It had a big cowboy hat on it, and you saw that. So, and then of course, in order for them to get the show out there, they expanded the efforts by sponsoring a country music caravan in the Los Angeles area. I guess bringing country artists to town and getting those people into the spotlight. So, how long were they actually at the bar? How many years was the award show there?
Only the first 2 years.
Only the first 2 years.
Yeah, the first 2 years it was held there at the Red Barrel, and then I think they managed to move it to somewhere down in L.A. The third or fourth year, I know it went to the Hollywood Palladium, and in between that period of time, there was another place. I had some notes somewhere. I was trying to remember exactly where they moved it, but Nudie and Dick Schofield knew some people that had a venue in the L.A. area, and they decided to move it there the third and fourth years, and then they moved it to the Hollywood Palladium.
And the Palladium was where I think Lawrence Welk did his show, and a few other mainstream big artists back in those days. So that was really like the happening place.
Yeah, and there was a lot of interest in it. I know in 1966, the third year, the host they had was Lauren Green from Bonanza.
From Bonanza, right,
yeah.
right.
And Lauren actually hosted it in 66 and 67. And then a gentleman by the name of Pat Buttram did it in 68. And 69 was when it was a big turning point, because in 69, Dick Clark was the host that year from American Bandstand. And the reason Dick got involved, my mom had hired a secretary by the name of Fran Boyd, and she was married to a gentleman by the name of Bill Boyd. And anybody who'd been around Dick Clark Productions or the music scene in L.A. at that time knew that Bill Boyd was the production manager for Dick Clark Productions. And so Bill was telling Dick Clark about the show, and he got very interested, and he eventually agreed to be the host. And shortly after that, American Bandstand and CBS, who Dick Clark worked with, agreed to sponsor the Academy Awards show, and it really, really took off from there, because now you've got Hollywood stars involved, and everybody wanted to be a part of it, and just to give away one of the hat trophies, let alone be one of the recipients of one of the awards.
And that, in the first few years that was done, was in the Los Angeles area?
Yeah, it was always done in the L.A. area. It was done in the L.A. area all the way up to, they went from the Palladium. Well, eventually they ended up MGM Studios, Universal Studios in L.A. And it was there for quite a few years. And
I know the first year that I attended the ACMs was at Universal, right?
That was a lot of fun.
And then it eventually wound up in Las Vegas.
Yeah, the new board in the early 90s, I believe, thought that would be a good financial move to move it to Las Vegas, and it proved to be right.
Which is where it's been ever since.
It's been there ever since, with the exception of the 50-year anniversary, which they did at Texas Stadium in Dallas.
Right.
That was 2 years ago. That ended up being kind of a logistical nightmare, however. It was a little bit too big, too much, and transitioning it from a football stadium to an award show banquet and all of that, it ended up being a lot more involved than I think they anticipated. So they moved back to the MGM Grand in Las Vegas 2 years ago or 3 years ago now, and it's been there ever since.
We're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to touch a little bit more on your mom and dad's involvement and how it evolved, and bringing in Fran Boyd, who I met when I attended the first year of the.
I remember you and I talked about that.
Yeah, so we'll come on back and talk about that some more. This is Bob Bender. We're in the studio today with Chris Christiansen, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Vinny Rebus, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag.com. That's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
Who better to give the Entertainer of the Year award than a man who has won every award there is? He sings on everybody's records, including mine, writes everyone's favorite songs, and as all of you know, he is the host of that other award show. He plays guitar, he plays golf, and he plays like he doesn't have a care in the world. But I know this guy, and I know he cares about everything and everybody. Here to present Entertainer of the Year award is your plain old everyday run-of-the-mill superstar, Vince Gill.
The nominees for the Entertainer of the Year are Brooks and Dunn, Kenny Chesney, Alan Jackson, and Toby Keith.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. We're back in the studio with Chris Christiansen talking about the Academy of Country Music Awards. We discussed in the previous segment, it was first held in 1966. I was doing some research on it and saw that when Dick Clark took it over, it was televised on ABC. And then the Academy joined with Dick Clark Productions, and they eventually moved it over to NBC, and then I guess finally CBS.
CBS has it now and has for quite a few years.
But when it left your folks' nightclub, it went to the
Beverly Hilton.
The Beverly Hilton, and then from there it finally went to the Palladium.
Went to the Palladium, yeah.
Right. So we were talking about during the break some of the presenters and the stars on this. This is kind of like the who's who of the entertainment business.
Yeah, it wasn't those days for sure. I know Lauren Green from Bonanza was the host, and Lauren was joined by Andy Devine and Pat Beltram and Chill Willis, Eddie Arnold, and Brenda Scott, Edgar Buchanan, and Donna Douglas.
From Beverly Hillbillies.
Beverly Hillbillies.
Right,
yeah.
Ellie Mae.
Ellie Mae.
Who we all had a crush on at one time.
Yeah, she was a cutie pie.
We're showing our ages here. Yeah,
that's for sure.
So Fran Boyd, getting back to her, she started off working with your mother as, I guess...
The secretary for the Academy, the board.
Yeah.
Because Mom, she was also running a nightclub, and she just didn't have time to do all of that stuff, and so they agreed to give her the money to hire a secretary to assist with all of the paperwork and all the other stuff that needed to be done. And it so happened that Fran Boyd was married to Bill Boyd, who was a production manager for Dick Clark Productions.
Right. And I guess from that point, it just took off pretty darn quick.
Totally snowballed because Dick just knew everybody in the music industry, no matter what genre you were talking about. And he attracted a lot of attention from Hollywood and all kinds of Hollywood people that wanted to be involved in it because it's exposure for them and it was good PR, and their managers were all knocking on the door saying, we'd like to have my client be a presenter, because it was televised at that point.
Right.
So that was good PR for them.
And it evolved from being a West Coast show to, I guess, Nashville, either the ACMs embracing Nashville or Nashville embracing the ACM.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they had to embrace Nashville entertainers because a lot of country music and musicians did come from Nashville.
Yeah.
They never forgot their roots, and they always focused on West Coast entertainment and singers and songwriters primarily and first. But, I mean, you can't ignore big acts and, recordings and people that are being played consistently on the radio. So, the board had to vote on the recipients of the awards, and it included anybody in country music.
Oh, so that's a good question. So I was a member of the ACMs back in the 90s and early 2000s. We voted as a body. If you were a member, you got to vote. So originally it was just the board that selected the nominees and the winners?
Right. They selected the nominees, and then they would narrow it down to the top 3 or 4, and then they would pick out of that the award winners.
How was it funded in the early days? I mean, that was still quite the endeavor.
It was done pretty much, donations and support from different artists who wanted to be involved in it. Some of the studios and labels would donate money, and of course, when Dick Clark got involved, then it brought big money.
Right, the sponsorships got involved.
Yeah, the sponsorships were lining up at that point. Anything that's televised drew big money. But up until then, like I said, the first 2 shows were potluck dinners.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun.
A lot of people don't.
Grassroots.
A lot of people don't understand that that's how it all started, was just in a nightclub. Is the club still there?
No, it's not. That was taken down about 14, 15 years ago. Hawaiian Gardens area is still there, but it's a small little suburb of South LA. But no, the club was too big and too much square footage for most people to manage and make it a money-making venue. It required a lot of work. And,
right.
You had to bring in big bands, and then that usually required a big outlay to bring them in, and you hoped you sold enough tickets, and so on and so forth.
So jumping back to Fran, when did she take over the day-to-day operations of it?
I think it was right around 66, 67, if I
So
memory
she ran
serves
it for a
me
long
right.
time, 'cause
Yeah,
I
she
met her
was
in
there for a
97.
long time. She was, she ended up being CEO of the Academy Board for years until she left, I want to say late 90s. But she was with the Academy for probably 30 plus years.
Dick Clark produced the show for television the entire time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once Dick Clark got involved in it, it was pretty much his baby and whatever network he was working with.
So your mom and dad, at what point did they bow out of the process?
Yeah, that's really hard to say. They never were entertainers. Mom and dad, one of the things I'm most proud of is that they were just farmers from Iowa with a dream to come out to California and the American dream. And they did that.
Really never had any intention of
none of that
this.
at all.
Yeah.
The only way they got really involved in it, my dad was a part owner of a company called Melody Music. They owned jukeboxes and pool tables and the coin-operated machines and cigarette machines, and had a lot of those machines in the bars all over Southern California. And so my dad ran that company, and my mom was the bookkeeper. And they got around music a lot, and eventually, every jukebox had these 45 records on it, and so they had to go to Capitol Records downtown in Hollywood and pick out all these 45s to put on the jukeboxes every week. And sometimes they would take me along because my sister and I were like music-aholics.
Now, how old were you?
I was like 12, 13 years old. Wow. And Dad would take me along because I knew all the music on the radios that people were playing. And so he would put me loose in this giant warehouse with rows and rows and rows of 45s. He said, go pick out 300 45s of all different singers that are popular. And so I did that for a couple of years and got real familiar with music and musicians and fell in love with music in general. But Dad was always partial to country music, so I always had to have a share of country music on the 45s. But that's really how he got started in the music end of it. And then the opportunity came up for a nightclub that they thought about buying, but it required live music. was a big step for them.
Because back in those days, you had to have if you had a club, you had to have live music.
You had to have a band. You had to have a live
They
band.
didn't have
it was
DJs
a house
back
band.
in those days, yeah.
You had a house band that you paid to play every weekend, and then if you were really aggressive, you would try to find a name that some people would recognize to come in on a weekend and pack the house. Of course, most of the money was made on liquor, not on the door, but you always had to pay those musicians, and it was always a bit of a risk because you had to pay them up front, to actually bring in a crowd. So.
Who'd they bring in?
Oh my gosh, I don't remember all the names now. I do remember one great story. One day when I was picking out records at Capitol Records, my dad went into a recording studio somewhere down in LA, and he came out and he said, I just saw the most fantastic guitar player I've ever seen in my life. This guy is amazing. And he was the backup guitar player for Dean Martin. I went, oh yeah, great. And who was this guy, Dean Martin, the drunk schmoozer cruiser.
Yeah.
And I said, what's his name? He goes, his name's Glenn Campbell. And he's really fabulous guitar player. Next thing I know, like 2 or 3 years later, Glenn Campbell was nominated for and got new Country Western Entertainer of the Year.
For the ACMs.
For the AGMs, yeah.
Wow, small world. And
he always stayed good friends with Mom and Dad.
Did he play at the club?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eddie Miller, Roger Miller, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, they were regulars at the Red Barrel nightclub. Mom was best friends with Bonnie Owens for years until she passed away. But to answer your question, I think back in the 70s, mid-70s, Mom and Dad realized that Hollywood had taken over, and they're just farmers from Iowa,
Right.
And so they kind of just got shuffled back into the back alcoves, and they really weren't anybody other than once in a while they'd get honorable mention, as our founders, Chris and Mickey, are here in the audience,
When we come back, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, you told me an amazing story that I still share with a lot of people about how the Academy of Country Music actually found out that your mom was still alive at that time and wanted to honor her. And I think that's a great story. So
very moving story for me, too.
We're definitely going to talk about that. This is Bob Bender in the studio with Chris Christiansen, talking about the Academy of Country Music, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music. Next up, the Indie Artist Spotlight, brought to you by Reverb Nation.
Hi, my name is Holly Horton, and I'm a member of Reverb Nation.
Spent many a days on McFrancis Road, where I once was alone, till you came along.
I'm based out of Birmingham, Alabama.
We first met in a yellow chateau, where we learned to grow, where we would roam. Now here I stay, you're at least a day's drive away.
I've played at just about every exit from the Gulf Coast northbound to Nashville.
The time came when winter would unfold, many nights that were cold, it seemed to never snow. You would laugh with me and I laugh with you, like good friends do. We were such a
My music is a mix between Americana, folk, and country.
Summer came, we had to bid adieu. You left and I never felt more blue. Here I stay, and you're at least a day's drive away.
Some of the artists I love listening to and have influenced me include Stevie Nicks, John Paul White, Jewel, and Emmylou Harris.
Take me back to that place where across the aisle to see a smiling face. Those are the moments we can't replace. Those are the moments that I embrace. Now here I stay, and you're at least a day's drive away.
This is a song that I wrote and had the amazing opportunity to record up in Nashville, and it's called Alabama Woman.
mama, daddy, and me. We were happy as we could be. Now I'm an Alabama woman, I'm tough as I could be. Don't you mess with me. Alabama, where the skies are so blue. Lord, I'm coming home to you. You'll get attached just like glue. Ain't no way you're forgetting this you. I'm an Alabama woman, I'm tough as I could be. Don't you mess with me. I've been through some pretty tough times. With a glass of sweet tea and God's grace, I'm fine.
You can visit my website, and that's holly.org. That's HOLLYE. You can find all my social media links on there, as well as listen to some of my music.
I'm an Alabama woman, I'm tough as I could be. I'm an Alabama woman, don't you mess with me. Now I'm an Alabama woman, I'm tough as I could be. Don't you mess with me. I'm an Alabama woman, don't you mess with me. I'm an Alabama woman, don't you mess with me.
Once again, this is Holly Horton, and I'm a proud member of Reverb Nation.
You're listening to the business side of music.
This is Bob Bender in the studio with Chris Christiansen. You're listening to this edition of the Business Side of Music. We're talking about the Academy of Country Music. The story you told me, you shared with me a few years ago, was just, it blew my mind. And I loved that. We talk about a lot of these people that started the ACMs, your mom and your dad in particular, were kind of maybe, as you said, put on the back shelf and almost forgotten. But then one day, you wanted to get your mom to the ACM Awards one last time, from what I understand.
And I was pretty sure by this time, which was, I think, 1999, they had been forgotten completely, other than maybe somebody looked up the archives. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So anyhow, Mom is like in her 90s and pushing the envelope as far as longevity.
Yeah. In a wheelchair. But still really mentally active. Oh, I'm sorry. It was 2009, not 1999. My wife just handed me a note that reminded me of that. So they're good at doing.
Yeah,
sometimes.
That's what wives are for.
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah. Anyhow, I had this desire to take Mom to an award show one more time before she wasn't able.
Right. Which is the hottest ticket in town.
Yeah,
in Las
exactly.
Vegas.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not cheap.
It's not cheap, right?
For three people, for instance, to go to the Academy show, it cost us about $6,000 just to go to the show. I mean, you got airfare, you got a new dress or a new suit. The seats alone are $500-$600 each.
Right.
And that's for one show, and they usually have two shows. They have a show after the recorded show and live talent performance, and that's another $400 or $500 each, so it adds up pretty quickly. But I thought, Suzanne and I have done fairly well. I'll bite the bullet, and I'll call the Academy and see if I can get some tickets. It was fairly late. The show is usually in early April, and I think it might have been March. Mm-hmm. And so anyhow, I looked up the Academy phone number and saw that they had moved from downtown LA, where they used to be in Santa Monica, over to Encino, and called up the Academy. And I had, we get every quarter the monthly publication from the Academy called Tempo. And it's basically a publication updating you on what's going on in the country music world and with the Academy of Country Music. So I saw that the new CEO was a gentleman by the name of Romeo Productions. Yes,
Right.
Bob Romeo. And so, I thought, well, I'll just pull a few strings. And I got a hold of a secretary, and I said, I'd like to talk to Bob Romeo.
And you're just like,
I'm just,
you're just
winging it.
You're
totally
Joe
winging
Schmo.
it.
Yeah.
I'm just winging it.
Yeah.
And she goes, well, can I say what it's in regards? And I said, well, it's just in regards that I'd like to see about getting some tickets for the show. And she goes,
And how many of those phone calls do they get?
Yeah, they must get millions, you know. And she goes, well, let me see if he's available. And may I have your name? I said, yeah, it's Chris Christiansen. So she goes, okay, hold on a minute. Well, in 2 minutes, Bob Romeo comes on the phone, and he goes, who's this? I said, this is Chris Christiansen. He goes, are you at all related to Chris and Mickey Christiansen? I said, yeah, they're my parents. And he goes, wow, what can I do for you? I went, well, you can talk to me for starters. That was a good thing.
Yeah.
I said, Mom is up here in Morro Bay, Central California, with my wife and I. And I would like to bring her to a show before she's gone. And but she's 92 and she's in a wheelchair. And Bob just like interrupted me, and he goes, "Your mom's still alive?" I went, "Yeah, she's right here." Smarter than I am, I can tell you that much. Sharp as a tack. And he goes, "OMG!" He said, "Whatever you want."
He actually was trying to find her at one point to see.
At one point, he said, we lost track of them when they were in Arizona, and we knew that your father had passed away from cancer back in the 70s or early 80s, and but we just assumed your mom had passed away also. I said, well, no, she's alive and well and kicking right here, and she would love to come to a show, but I'm willing to pay for my tickets, and I know that in the very set up the board and all the agreement and the original foundation of the Academy, they're not allowed to ever give away tickets to any shows. It was one of the very first stipulations they had in their basic board agreements. Anyhow, well, Bob said, whatever you want, Chris. He said, I would love to meet you. I would love to meet your mother because I've read and know a lot about your mother and her history and what she's done for the Academy. And he said, so, yes, I will have 3 tickets for you and your wife and your mom, or a limo pick you up at the airport. I'll have a hotel room for you at the MGM Grand, and found out later, funded all of that out of his own pocket because they aren't allowed to give away tickets, which was really generous. And when we got there, they really did. They had a red carpet, they had a limo, with the name on it, saying Christiansen, follow us, da-da-da. It was really, really a great experience. And we had backstage passes, got to meet all kinds of entertainers, Taylor Swift and George Strait and Tim McGraw, and on and on and on and on. I got to go to all the rehearsals and just had a fabulous time. And it really was the cherry on the ice cream soda, so to speak, for my mom.
Didn't you say that at one point in a conversation we had, they wanted to honor your mother on the show?
Yeah, well, I didn't know this until I got there. And Bob told me, he said, you know what, I've been thinking about it, and I really would like to have George Strait give your mom an award for being one of the founders. And I went, whoa, that's unbelievable, because my mom's favorite singer in the whole world is George Strait. So he said, well, when we first open the show, we're going to introduce your mom, and we'll present her with a Founders Award. We were pretty stoked about that. Well, as it turned out, right before the show, Bob was talking with the producer from CBS, and he went, oh, hell no. 30 seconds is worth like $300,000 or something like that. He says, we cannot give you 30 seconds to make this presentation. If we'd have known maybe a year ago or whenever, maybe. So they weren't able to do it. But anyhow, when they opened the show, before they went live, Bob was up on the stage. He opened this show up, introduces, what's his name, the host. But he said, but before we go live, I want to recognize one of our founders, and she's here tonight. And right over here in the front row, and I'd like you to all pay your respects to Mickey Christiansen, who's right down here in the front row. They have the spotlight shining around, and my mom's going, what are they doing? I went, Mom, you need to stand up. And she kind of wheelchair bound, but she can't stand. So I had to grab her under her butt and push her up. And then once she got up and the spotlight was on her, she was like, there wasn't no getting her down. Then she was waving at everybody, and everybody's applauding and everything. But it really, it made her life a lifetime achievement of some acknowledgement. That and I'll wind it up real quickly with, after that show, they had a George Strait.
Because to me, this is the best part of this
was
story.
The best caveat of them all. And it was to honor George, who was being honored that year with the 10-year Entertainer of the Decade award. And they had a special show for George after the recording, or the live television recording. And we were invited to go to that, and we did. And while we were there, all kinds of artists were coming up.
Did you say like Martina McBride came up to your
Martina
mom?
McBride, remembered Mom. What's her name? Patty Loveless. Taylor Swift came over and said hi. And a lot of different artists were they recognized Mom from pictures or whatever. And I think rumors had kind of gotten around the hall, a little bit, that one of the founders was there. And they were coming over paying their respects. But George had a big line of people waiting to sign autographs. I really wanted Mom to meet George because she really was.
Because didn't you ask your mom if there was anybody she wanted to see?
Yeah, and it was always George Strait.
Yeah.
But he was really busy, and a lot of people were getting autographs from him up at the front of this auditorium we were in. And I happened to go up the bar to get a drink, and I was standing next to Montgomery Gentry, the big tall guy.
Troy Gentry?
Yeah, Troy Gentry. And I looked over at Troy, and I went, "Hey, man, what's going on?" And he goes, "Hey, how's it going? What are you drinking?" I'm having tequila. I said, what are you up to, man? I said, "Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because I'm actually here with my mom, who's one of the founders, Mickey Christiansen." He goes, "Yeah, I remember Mickey's name." I said, "But I got a problem because Mom's way over there in a wheelchair, and she would love to meet George, who's way over there with all those people in between." And he goes, "Follow me." Well, Troy's a big guy.
Yeah.
Walks over to Mom, introduces himself. I don't think Mom really knew who he was at first. I'm like, "Mom, Montgomery Gentry. This is the Gentry guy." She goes, "Oh, yeah, how are you, And he goes, "You want to meet George?" She goes, "Yeah." She's like a little kid in a candy store. And next thing I know, there is an aisle wide open straight towards George, about 3 foot wide. He just walked through those big shoulders.
Yeah, Troy Gentry is just
steamrolling.
Yeah.
Said, "Hey, get out of the way. Mickey Christiansen's coming down. Get out of the way." And he's just gently, and I just wheeled the wheelchair right straight to George. And we got right up there, and George's wife standing alongside of him, next to him, make sure nobody grabs him or whatever, I guess. And she leans over, she goes, "Can I help you?" And I went, "Yeah, this is Mickey Christiansen." She goes, "Oh, hi, Mickey." And I said, "Mom would like to meet your husband." She's always idolized George. So she whispers to George's ear while he's signing autographs. And he says, "Folks, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to stop signing autographs for a few minutes. I have to meet somebody right here. Hold on, I'll be back in a few minutes." So he walks away, walks over to the wheelchair and leans down to Mom. And he goes, "Hi, Mickey, nice to meet you." And she goes, "Oh, my God." She was like a little teeny kid. She goes, "I would waltz across Texas to meet you." I went, "Oh, God, Mom." That was really corny. But George Strait leaned down into Mom's ear and he goes, "Mickey, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you."
Wow.
And that just floored me. And I went, that's what I did all this for.
Yeah.
That's the kind of recognition coming from a country music artist that recognized they went from shit-kicking music and no money to one of the best-paying genres in music.
And still is.
And still is, because some people recognized that country music had something to offer.
And a little bar in Hawaiian Gardens by holding an awards show with a potluck.
Yeah, 2 farmers from Iowa and a singer and a disc jockey.
And didn't you say that they snapped a picture of George with your mom?
Yeah, I've got that picture in my wall.
And that wound up on the wall at the Academy of Country Music office, right?
Yeah.
Amazing story.
Yeah. I also took a picture of Bob Romeo with Mom, because as we were leaving, Mom was saying, "Thank you, Bob, for everything you've done." And he leaned down and he said the same exact thing that George Strait said. "Mickey, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you." And I went, "Did you and George rehearse that?" He just laughed. He goes, "No, Chris, it's true."
It is.
And I went, "Well, thank you for everything you've done." And he said, "No, thank you for taking care of your mom and for everything that they've done." And I still am fighting the powers to be to someday get some kind of an award, a Founders Award for Mom and Dad, who passed away without really any recognition as it turned out. But Bob was going to do it, but now he's retired. He's no longer with the Academy, and I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to pull that off, but I'm still lobbying for somebody out there to recognize the Christiansens and their involvement. They did give an award just 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, to Tommy Wiggins in Asheville. Yeah, the ACM Honors Awards show. There's a precedent set.
Yeah, maybe it's time to have an award established in the name of your mom and your dad.
Well, that would be really appropriate, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Anything along those lines. But I will tell you that those two things, being able to go to the show, having George Strait say that to Mom and Dad and Bob, Romeo both, really made Mom's last 2 years of her life pure joy, and she got her 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah, with George Strait.
With George Strait. She didn't have to waltz across Texas to do it.
No, she didn't. Chris, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Love the time, and we'll have to get together and share some more stories.
Got a bunch of them.
Great. If you're interested in learning more about our show, drop us a line at musicpodcast@mail.com. That's musicpodcast@mail.com. If you have any suggestions of persons or topics that involve some facet of the music industry that you'd like to hear about on our podcast, please feel free to let us know. You can follow us on Facebook on the Business Side of Music podcast page. You can also find us on Twitter at Music Business Podcast. Also, if you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, post a review on what you think of our show. This is Bob Bender, and you've been listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender for Bob Bender Productions. Co-producer for the show is Vinny Rivas. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.